Andrea L. Rogers is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. She graduated with an MFA from the Institute for American Indian Arts. While there, she completed her short story collection, Man-Made Monsters, a meditation on love, loneliness, family, and the monsters in society. Cherokee people are centered in this collection, along with a cast of vampires, werewolves, zombies, aliens, ghosts, two handsome princes, and a goat boy. Andrea's children's book, Mary and the Trail of Tears, was included on the best books of 2020 by both NPR and American Indians in children's literature. Her Cherokee Futurism, The Art Thieves, will be out in fall 2024. Can you tell me more about your educational background?
Yeah, I went to the University of Tulsa for a bachelor's in English and really had no idea what I was going to do with that. And so I had a wonderful professor there who was a Shakespearean named Eric Rasmussen. And he was actually an adjunct, so he was only there for like a year, a visiting professor or whatever. And he was like, well, it just makes you a better person. And I'm like, I can't afford to just be a better person. I need a job and insurance. And so, kind of the default, I think, for a lot of people who do an English degree is teaching. And I didn't know if I wanted to do that. I definitely did want to do it at like the university level, but that required more school. And I really wanted to get out and start a career of some sort. At the time, I was unrealistic and thought, oh, you get one career and that's what you have the rest of your life. Now I think most of us recognize that that's not really, it's not even a best case scenario, and it's really not the way things work. So it does for some people. It hasn't for me. So I ran into a woman named Marla Redcorn, who is Osage and Kiowa, and she was at the university looking for people. Basically, she had gone by the art department to talk to them about students who were graduating or who might be interested in working at Philbrook Museum of Art. And specifically, she was looking for ideally Native students because she was going to be interviewing artists from a variety of tribes who had pieces in the collection at Philbrook. And so she was leaving the art department, and I was just walking on campus with some other people, and I ran into her, and I knew her because she was involved in the American Indian theater group at the time, and I cannot remember the name of that group, but I had gone to see plays and she was in it, and she was the cousin of a girl I went to high school with. And so we stopped and we talked, and she was like, well, do you want a job? And I was like, yeah, a job would be great. I'm graduating and have no idea what I'm going to do with my life. So yeah, a job would be great. And so I ended up going to work for Philbrook for about 9 months, interviewing Native artists. So that was my first experience with a museum. But I always thought I wanted to be, I have a minor in photography. I'd done photography since high school. Well, actually before high school even. And so since I was 13, I'd had a camera and loved to take pictures. And so me and my Pentax K1000 went everywhere. And so I thought, I wanted to be maybe a photographer. And so then I worked at a museum for 9 months, and I realized that working in the arts, you end up applying for grants constantly to keep your job. And so very few people actually get the real jobs that like have job security and they will get paid no matter what, and insurance. A lot of the positions, you're applying for grants for those positions to keep existing. And I couldn't handle that kind of financial instability. And so, but here I am now, I'm a writer, and I would say that lots of financial instability comes with that. So here I am. Anyway, so I did that, and then I had a friend who passed from complications related to HIV, and I had another friend who worked for AmeriCorps' HIV National AIDS Fund. And so when my job at Philbrook ended, I transitioned into doing HIV AIDS education with the Indian Healthcare Resource Center there in Tulsa. And so I did that for a year. And then from there, I transitioned into youth services. So everything kind of led into the next thing. So then I did youth services for a while. And then I had my first surprise baby and stayed home for about 2 years. And I had been going to the library a lot with her, and we'd go to the library, and I saw that there was a job opening at a local library not too far from us in Sand Springs. And so I applied for it. And I thought, you know what? I think this is what I always wanted to be. I always wanted to be a librarian. And I really did. When I was in second grade, I wanted to be either a librarian or a writer. And so, because when you're a little kid, often you don't think, oh, I can be both. And so I thought, well, I want to be a librarian. And so I did get a job, and then I worked at the library for a couple of years. And then my husband's grandmother's husband passed, and she asked us to move to Dallas so she could stay independent with our help. And so my husband had been looking for a teaching job in Tulsa forever, and the surrounding area, but his subject matter is history. And at that time, and probably still in Oklahoma, the history teachers are generally the coaches. And so they were much more interested in whether or not he had ever coached football or basketball, and if he had a winning record. And of course, he did not. He had a master's in history. He had applied history experience. He wrote historic survey stuff. He had actual museum experience for history stuff, and they were not interested in that at all. And so when he went to Dallas, the No Child Left Behind stuff had started in Texas already under Governor George Bush then. And so he got a job like within 24 hours. And so we ended up moving to Dallas. And then we stayed in the DFW area for about the next 24 years. So we were in Dallas about 4 years. And then, and I started looking at library schools. There was a library school close to us, but at that time, nobody was doing distance learning. You had to actually go places and do your degree, period. And so I was looking at Denton, which was probably an hour commute from Dallas at that time. And then I ended up getting an alternative certification in English. So I started teaching English for Dallas Independent School Districts. But I went in thinking, knowing that they had an alternative certification for librarians. But the first year I went in for teaching, you had to have 1 year teaching experience before they would roll you into the librarian program. And I was like, well, I can do that. I can do a year and then I'll do the library program. Well, every year they would add more hoops to jump through. And so at the end of the first year, it was like, oh no, now you have to have 2 years of teaching to go into the program. And I did not have that. So, anyway, so it was apparently not meant to be. So I had worked in libraries in Tulsa and as an assistant librarian, but I never made it to library school. And so with my alternative certification in English, eventually we moved to Fort Worth, and I had my last child. And so I stayed home with them for a little bit and started looking around to see where I wanted to work, where I wanted to teach. And there was an all-girls school in Fort Worth, and I was super excited about it. I had taught one all-girls English class at the high school I'd been at in Dallas, and saw where it could be really useful, where you could really have really good discussions about literature in ways that didn't work so well in a class with boys and girls, and that we were having really good conversations by the end of that class. And so I kind of got excited about that, and I wanted to teach there. And so I did finally end up teaching there, but I wanted to teach art, and I ended up teaching principles of engineering and introduction to engineering and communications classes for the first couple of years. And then they made me a deal where they said, well, we know you don't want to teach English. Because my thing was, once I started teaching English, it was really difficult to do my own writing, because you're spending so much time. In that case, it was with early American literature, and reading their work and their essays and trying to, help them become better writers. It was making it difficult for me to do my own writing and to move out of that headspace. And so I really didn't want to do it. And so they made me a deal. They were like, we know you don't want to teach English. And they were like, but you can. And if you'll do 2 sections of English, pre-AP English, we'll give you 4 sections of art. And then next year you'll be all art. It was the worst year of my life, but it did get me what I eventually wanted the next year. They were true to their word. And after that, I just got to teach art. And that was fun because when I was teaching art, I was making art. In the art class that I taught, the girls loved it. They were like, this class is like our therapy. And they were like, we just come in and we make things and you're so chill and we're just enjoying, we just get to talk and make things. And I gave them a really good space to be in, to make art. And it was fun. But it also, and I made art too, but it also freed up that part of the brain I needed freed up in order to make art as far as writing. And so I was able to do a lot of writing there in that space. So, they would leave for the day or go to lunch and I would write at my desk. So I had a nice clean space to write in, and I had time after school to write before I had to go home. And so I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the low residency program at the Institute for American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. And I had been listening to writing podcasts, and I'd been telling myself, okay, this is my MFA. This is how I'm going to get better at the craft, right? This is how I'm going to become a writer, and learn and finally make a living at it. And so, but then they mentioned that. And so my oldest child was actually applying for, grants and stuff for for college and applying to colleges, and she was in that space. And so I was filling out all the paperwork anyway. And I thought, well, maybe I'll apply to this. And so I started the application, and then I got to the part, I finished it really, but then I got to the part where it said it needed a letter of reference, and I had to have 2 or 3 letters of reference. And the deadline was just too soon, and I just couldn't ask people to write me a letter of reference that quickly. And so I just closed the application and kind of forgot about it. And then the date was coming up that the applications were due, and my phone rang, and it was IAIA. And they said, hey, we saw that you started the application. Can we ask why you didn't go ahead and submit it? And I said, well, yeah, there's no way I can. And I was stunned. I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is unexpected. And the only reason I answered the call, because I saw it was from New Mexico, is I assumed it was like my husband's mom. And so I said, well, there's no way I can get those letters. I can't ask people to do a letter of reference that quickly. That's just not, I can't, the people I would ask are very busy people, and I can't do that to them. And they said, well, you can turn in your application, which included some of my work and an essay. And they said, and they have a month to get the letters in. And I was like, oh, well, maybe we can do that. And so that's how I ended up at the MFA program. And it was a low residency program. You'd go like a week every semester. And then the final semester, you'd go a week at the beginning and a week at the end to defend your thesis. And it was really the best thing for me to really focus on craft. I was super busy that whole time. I was teaching and momming and also writing until like 3 a.m. and editing until 3 a.m. But I wrote 12 of the stories 12 stories that are in Man-Made Monsters. I wrote there. And so it was a great space because I had people to workshop with, other Native writers to listen and, give me feedback in a way that you don't have, in real life without working really hard to put together a critique group, right? And so my craft got better a lot more quickly, I think, doing that program. And then Toni Jensen was a professor there at IAIA, and so I was talking to her one day about like what I should do next, because I had written Mary and the Trail of Tears. It was going to be coming out January 2020, and I really, I want to focus on writing. And I was like, I cannot keep, staying up till 3 a.m. writing and then getting up and teaching the next day. I'm exhausted, I'm tired. And, I don't know that I'm going to do my best work, and something's going to suffer if I keep doing this. And so she had suggested the University of Arkansas and said that they did have some money for funding if I wanted to apply there. So I looked at a couple of other schools, and I applied at the University of Arkansas and the University of Denver because University of Denver had a PhD in creative writing, and I was like, oh, that would be perfect. I mean, because I can write. I mean, I can write all day. But I got waitlisted there and not funded. And so the University of Arkansas offered me a fellowship, and it was I came over and visited Fayetteville. I loved the nature, the bike trails, the walkability of Fayetteville at that time, and so it was the best option, and it also turned out to be the best, I think, for me, for my work.
So are you still in the PhD program here?
Yeah, ideally I'm in the last year of it. So, so I need to put together my prospectus and have my meeting. I've done my written comps, but I've got to do my prospectus and my oral comps, and then write a dissertation. So yeah, I'm in the last year of that.
How have you found time for writing while being in a program?
Oh, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. Unfortunately, definitely, because so many people died. COVID happened and we went on lockdown. And so I had moved up here by myself. My family was still in Texas. And I was staying in an apartment all by myself, and we were on lockdown. So I would get up in the morning and ride my bike outside, and then I would come back and I would have time to make food, and then I would teach online or I would take my class online, and then I would hop back off, and I was there in my apartment with all my books and my computer, and nobody was spending time together. I moved here all by myself, so I didn't have like a pod that I was spending time with physically. And so I had all the time in the world to focus. And so I actually did spend that year working on a couple of things, but finessing the man-made monster stories. I did take a speculative fiction class where I workshopped a couple of stories that I ended up adding to Man-Made Monsters. The next semester I took a class with Tony Jensen, and I wrote a story in there. Let's see. And so because of lockdown, I had lots of time, because my priorities also at that time were family, writing, and whatever work I had to do, and my health. And then also trying to learn my dad's language, the Cherokee language. And so those were my priorities. And so it made it really easy then to get a lot of writing done. It's more difficult now just because, I have to work around my family again. And so get my kid to school on time and all that sort of thing, and I have more real responsibilities again, but still prioritizing, trying to be healthy. That's something that's become super important to me, is like, I remind myself body first, because your body is your car for your brain. I mean, so if your body's not working, you can't get your brain the places you need to get it to do the work, or, even to sit at a computer for hours. And so I'm trying to really prioritize that in ways I didn't, in my first 50 years. And so if it's not like working on writing or spending time with my family or doing cultural activities or language learning, then it really can't be a priority. I'm usually saying no to things other than that. If it's not feeding the writing, if it's not feeding the work or feeding the culture or my family in some way or my body, then I don't have a lot of time for that. I'm having to say no to a lot more things, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are you ever going to pursue full-time writing?
That's the dream. So that's the hope. So I'm hoping, I don't mind teaching like a creative writing class. because it's like teaching art. It feeds the work, but ideally that is what I'm hoping, in another year or two, I'll be able to do. I am currently teaching a creative writing class at the Institute for American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and it's online and I love it and it just makes me really happy. And so, but I would like to, but I've got to get, the contracts and the advances and everything. I mean, you just really have to plan ahead when you're in this business, because even when you plan ahead and think you're going to pick up a check at the end of an event, I've found this summer has been the summer of the check is in the mail. And so it's really more like 2 months before you get paid. And so another crazy thing that's going on with publishing is they seem to be, some publishers, and my publisher LQ is not like this. This is not a problem I have with them at all. But some publishers are giving you like a offer memo and then kind of expecting work before you even have a contract or an advance. And I think, I have to say no to that, because I have to prioritize my PhD program, my family, and actual contracts that I've already signed and have gotten advances for. So that's something I was talking to some other writers at a retreat about 2 weeks ago, and they were like, yeah, what is this? And they said that some writer who's got like a backlist of 40 books or something was like, oh yeah, I'll write the whole book sometimes before I ever have the advance or the contract. And yeah, when you first start out, that's kind of the expectation. I mean, I spent 20 years on Man-Made Monsters without a contract, right? And that's also when you're most free to do whatever you want, because you don't have a contract yet. You don't have someone who's paying you money yet. But then later, when people are coming to you and asking, hey, will you write this and we'll pay you and to expect you to go ahead and write a whole book without a contract or an advance is kind of crazy. And so I wish the writers who can afford to would say no to that, because it's forcing other writers who really can't afford to say no to feel like they have to do this as well. And, I can't live on nothing. I mean, I still have to, my credit card companies still want their money on time. And so I can't live on something that you've promised me and write you a 70,000 word book. And, when I could be doing things, whether it's a job or something, I need to know that there is money coming in because my mortgage still has to be paid.
I think that's a great segue to the Art Thieves. Can you talk a bit about how the book came to be?
Well, as I said, I did work. I have always loved art. I have a minor in art with an emphasis on photography. My father was a phenomenal artist. He could draw anything. He could just look at it and draw it, and he was amazing. And so I think when you're a kid, sometimes it can be hard to make that leap of like, well, yeah, he's been doing this for 30 years. And so if you're not immediately that good, you're like, some of us are like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to try that. I'll just do photography. That looks like what I'm taking a picture of. And so, but I had always loved art and wished were better at it. And so I worked at Philbrook Museum back in 1994 and then in 95. And then we worked on a book interviewing Native artists. And then when I got to Fort Worth and I was teaching art, part of the reason we moved to Fort Worth was there were some great museums. Parking was still free at that time. Dallas had great museums too, but they weren't free. And so Fort Worth just seemed like a family friendlier place to be poor. And so, and my husband and I were both teachers. So, we weren't making tons. And then of course I was staying home with kids every now and then. And so, Fort Worth had great museums. And one of the museums that had is the Fort Worth Museum of Modern Art. And so I would go with my baby and carry her around and, we'd see the art. It was a free museum, at that time it was free for the most part, I think. And, there were great parks and stuff there. And so sculptures we could go and look at. And so I'd go to the museum, and then there was a piece there called Ladder for Booker T. Washington. And it was my favorite piece. And so later, when I was an art teacher, I was taking the students to a field trip there. And, and as soon as I could get away, the first thing I did was to go look for the piece, not realizing it had been borrowed by Obama for the National Gallery. And I got there and it was gone. And I was just like, oh no, where is it? And I was terrified that maybe they had sold it or traded it. And because for me, it was the most important piece in the museum, because it was called Ladder for Booker T. Washington. And it just had so much emotional and historical, I say baggage, but it's not a bad thing, but it had so much weight of history and race relations and, how this country dealt with the formerly enslaved people as far as their education, and, and the debates between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington over what was best for their people. And so I was just heartbroken it was gone, because I would go and sit there and just sort of almost meditate or think about things like, how the promise of education and how that squared with reality. And then later, there was an issue at my school. We had two teachers who had done something kind of ugly and racist. And, squaring that with how much education people of color had to get just to be competitive with white people who had less education, but who knew everybody, right? Or had those relationships, or it just seemed like the bar was so much higher for people of color to get jobs, to jump through hoops. And, so I would sit and think about all kinds of things in front of this piece, and it was gone. And so then I was like, well, and so that, I don't know, at some point I started thinking about it getting stolen. And if it was stolen, where would it go, or how would they steal it? And actually I had a friend who took me to the Dallas Museum of Art, was hosting a lecturer who was involved in the Gardner Art Museum theft. And so, so listening to him talk about that theft and how that all went down, just kind of spurred me on some more about like, what would be the logistics of this, and how would you switch it out? And, I know it's kind of crazy, because the reality is when they moved it to the National Gallery, it took 12 people to move it. So it'd be very unlikely that 3 people could steal it and switch it out with a fake piece in the middle of the night. But it is fantasy for a reason. So
that's really cool. How often does artwork inspire your writing?
A lot, I think. Sometimes like for one, I took a picture of the ladder of Booker T. Washington, and I enlarged it and hung it over my desk for like the last 3 years while I was working on the book. As a photographer, there were a lot of photographers whose work I really loved. And often, I guess, that's part of why we like a picture. It's worth 1,000 words or whatever, but it's really worth a lot more, because you're telling yourself stories about what's going on, and why certain choices were made, from the lighting to the positionality of the subject to what was cropped out. And one thing, when I first started writing this, really kind of my theme was like how important art is, and universal, or can be universal, and how it can be timeless, right? And then people were recommending Station 11, I think it is, because they were like, oh, well, that's the only book I know of which is about, how important art is. And I read it, and, it was really good. It just actually made me kind of meditate on the fact that maybe art was only important in the context of humanity. And so my original theme for the book actually changed from like that art is like super, super, super important, to yes, it's important, but it's only important in the context of humanity. And so without community, without love, without people, it doesn't hold as much importance. So then when the movie or the series came out for Station 11, I really thought that was really the theme of that too. And so it was interesting to me how the adaptation of the book evolved into sort of being more about community, being more about taking care of each other and connection. So yeah.
How did you arrive at the decision to set this in the future?
Oh, well, since I'm writing for young adults, I didn't want to set it too soon because it's pretty scary. And, the reality is, while I was writing it, I would write about things and then they would kind of happen. And so that was sort of freaky. And so I would send my editor stuff and I would say, my husband says I need to stop writing. And Nick was like, I'm kind of thinking you might need to too. And so, because like just oddball stuff would happen. And then there was this really funny, crazy thing. The Choctaw Light Horsemen I had sent a copy of the book to my two writer friends who were Choctaw, Stacy Wells and Leslie Widener. And just to make sure that, they thought my representation of the Choctaw Nation and Choctaw characters was okay. And I mentioned the Choctaw Light Horsemen, and my friend writes back and she said, actually, I think it's just called the Choctaw Police Force. And I was like, oh, okay, well, good to know. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to leave it. And then a month later, I saw that the Choctaw Nation had rebranded their police force as the Choctaw Light Horsemen. And I was like, yeah, I made that happen. And so anyway, but that was a good thing that happened. And so, Octavia Butler set Parable of the Sower like in this year, and she's not around to see how terribly close we are to some of the terrible things that happen in that. But I moved it that far forward because I'm hoping that humanity can make some choices that will keep these things from happening. So I figured we needed more of a buffer. And I didn't want to say it's happening in 10 or 20 years because I don't want it to happen. And I want to have hope. And so to navigate that hope, not for just me, but also for my reader, I wanted to give us more time.
In addition to being set in the future, it's also a time travel narrative. So you're moving through time. What is your advice to keep from getting convoluted or like making the narrative difficult to follow when you're doing that?
Oh, a couple of things. Because also in Man-Made Monsters, I mean, I kind of time travel in that, right? Because I start in 1839, it goes all the way to 2039. And so I actually created a piece of yarn in my apartment, that had the stories, like what stories happen where based on Post-it notes and who's born when. And so I created an actual physical timeline for that one. And for this one, I kind of did the same thing. But I'm definitely going to credit my copy editors for catching where I messed it up. And so, because there were a few places where they're like, well, you say this is happening on Tuesday, but according to the calendar, and because at some point, when you're just generating the work, you can lose track of it super easily. So I would say getting that all straightened out, is totally my copy editors, having good copy editors, having good readers who have a knack for that sort of thing, is really, really, really important. So, and that would be the same for anything that you're writing about. When you're writing about, populations who you're not part of, when you're representing other groups, you definitely should have readers who can see your blind spots to save you from harming anyone or making a fool out of yourself. So good readers really helped a lot too. So
this is a bit of a personal question maybe, but is there a moment in time in particular that you would change if you could time travel?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the one moment that I have is I was babysitting one time and something happened and I was like, oh, I have to call my dad and tell him about this. And then I got busy and I had an event that night and I had to pick up the kids from school. And my father actually ended up having a stroke that day and going into a coma for the next week. And so if I could go back, I would call him. So, and I don't know if that would change anything, but I just would have made that last phone call. That's the big one.
Hey,
Sorry, it's dark.
oh no, that's okay.
So, and that's what I think about, like with time travel is like, what would you do? What would you change? I mean, what kind of things would, still be good for humanity, I guess. And like, because anytime you change one thing, you don't know what else that changes, right? So,
Yeah, that would be my fear about like changing things in the past. It's just like the ripple effects of it.
yeah. And Stephen Graham Jones has a comic book series, The Earth Divers, which is really, it's about that. And like, what do you have to change to keep colonization from happening, to keep, so many Native American people from dying, and how much of it's like, it's going to happen anyway. And how much of it's like, oh, you've just made things worse. And so, anyway, so yeah, it's a quandary. People with a conscience couldn't just do it. So the same people who created AI and have no idea like what its potential are the same people who could time travel just like blithely ignorant of like how many other tragedies they've caused. So.
Since you kind of touched on this, but one of my favorite things in the book was how even as people left the planet, the Cherokee Nation and other tribes and indigenous people were buying up the properties from like the exiting settlers. And I wondered if you could speak a bit to how we're so used to seeing indigenous people depicted in the past, pre-colonization. Tell me more about indigenous people after the apocalypse.
I think that, I mean, the thing is like right now, the Cherokee Nation is actively, I mean, they do keep putting land in trust. They do keep picking up more properties. And so it actually, plays out something that's really happening. And there are tribes like the Lipan Apache, who part of federal recognition, I think, is having a land base. And so they, Texas basically took away all their land. And so, they are, I think they've been given a cemetery, I may be wrong, where they, were able to use DNA and prove that, their ancestors are buried there. I've visited the homelands and, it's a very small reservation, and then driven around where we used to be, and you see like, places where there are just like derelict cars. And so it kind of hurts. Like, you're like, oh, you took this land away from us and you took everything out of it you could get, and then you abandoned it and just trashed it. And so, to see that there's definitely a mindset of an extraction economy versus an economy of cultural values of reciprocity with the land, taking care of it. And if you take care of it, it will take care of you. So actually, I read a lot of Afrofuturisms to write this book. Because I did have this idea like 15 years ago, but I wasn't ready to write it 15 years ago. And then, most of the sci-fi I had read was by white authors for the most part. I mean, Octavia Butler was an outlier in my history of reading sci-fi and fantasy. And so I really kind of had to move away from the white writers, because they really carried forth the whole exploitation, and we're here to extract all the minerals from this planet. And, assuming that all aliens are here if the aliens show up, it's obviously, to exploit us, because that's how we've always done. And so I had to really get away from that kind of sci-fi in order to write this, because I wanted to write something that conveyed hope, but also, the cultural values of taking care of the land. And if you just use the land, you're not taking care of it. And I mean, you can use it in a way that's conscientious, that it's not just for you. To me, it's sort of crazy that, I mean, we didn't make this planet, and everything that we have on this planet was given to us. And so to treat it as something that can be privately owned and taken away from and push other people off of, it seems really wrong to me. And so, I don't, and then I also think about the question of home, like our homelands. We've been off there. There are Cherokee people still there, and relatives of ours who are still there. The Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indian is in Cherokee, North Carolina. But what is home? I mean, if I had the choice, would I go back to the homelands when we've built something here for 200 years? Is this our new home? That's definitely, I think, a question probably definitely a question that comes up in Afrofuturisms, because people who were kidnapped from Africa and brought here, well, this is their home now too. And so, how do we navigate where is home, and how do we navigate where we're going to put down roots? And it really, for me, the answer came into like, it's where you build your community, right? It's where you take care of the land, and the land takes care of you. And so, for instance, I was at Cherokee Holiday and went to several sessions on ethnobotany and the garden tour. And, there are plants in Oklahoma now that have either been over harvested or just can't grow there anymore because of just a few degrees of warming of the planet. And so Feather Smith was saying, well, this just doesn't grow here anymore, and you have to go like 2 hours into Arkansas to find it. And so the Cherokee Nation has a pact, and I'm not sure who it's with or who the treaty's with, but where our medicine keepers can go along the Buffalo River and gather medicinal foods or medicinal plants or cultural plants. But they've had to do that because of climate change, right? They've had to do that because of, how we've devastated the land with just, too much construction and too much exploitation and extraction. I mean, and there are places like Pitcher, Oklahoma, that, a company from California came and, extracted lots of minerals and just destroyed the water there. And then they just left. They made all their money, and then they went back to California. And so leaving all these Cherokees on poisoned land, which, will give you cancer and, cause all kinds of things to happen to you. And to me, that's just unconscionable, and I don't understand how that keeps happening. And and there are repercussions, I think, for that, but I don't understand how these companies aren't held legally accountable, I guess. The people who made the money, how they're not held legally accountable.
So I attended a workshop that you hosted at the public library.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time you said, I wanted to write stories where the girl came home. And that really struck me, like so much that I wrote it down in my journal. This book is full of some very dark moments, but ultimately it ends on a note of hope. And I just wondered if you could speak a bit about how you manage that balance between despair and hope in your writing, particularly when you're writing in such real settings and amid such real social issues.
Yeah. Sometimes I cheat. And so with the Art Thieves, I said, okay, it's going to be really bad, but it's going to have an end, right? It's going to be 90 days of chaos. And then, people don't like chaos. And so they will eventually try and put some structure on it. And so, one, I imagine that we wouldn't put up with chaos for that long. And two, I do try, I recognize that terrible things happen, but I also recognize that, there's a whole lot of kindness in the world and in humans that sort of goes unnoticed. In some ways, kindness is kind of banal. Someone opening the door for you, holding the door for you, or helping you, pick up your grocery, helping you when they see you need it, and not actually, targeting you as a serial killer is not really lauded. And so, I mean, and not that it should be, but to navigate, the bad things and hopelessness, I had to really emphasize the good things, I think. And, whether it's beauty or whether it's love or whether it's music, whether it's a song that makes you remember, the first time you held hands with someone, or, your wedding, or the first time you danced with someone. I think we need those glimmers. And so I try and make sure that the heaviness is outweighed by love and by joy and by connection and hope.
That's beautiful. Can you give our viewers a prompt based on the Art Thieves?
Yeah, I don't remember where I got it, but it's one of my favorites. You come home and on your porch is some creature that doesn't normally talk, but it does. So write that scene. So you have to think about, like, what is the creature, and is it something I would expect to talk? Do all those chickens on this planet talk? Yeah. So you gotta think, who's the character? Is it a surprise? Is it expected? What's this creature? Is it a magical creature? So it's so as I said, I teach IAI, a creative writing course, and we've done this, and I love the stories that people start telling, and then some of those stories, continue, and so this, it can be the beginning of something really cool.
We do have 2 audience questions. Do you mind staying just for those?
That'd be great.
Awesome. Okay, first one. Where do you seek inspiration when dealing with writer's block?
Oh, that one is, I used to say I didn't really believe in writer's block. And then I realized that it took me 15 years to feel ready to write the Art Thieves. And so I don't know if I would call that writer's block, but I knew I didn't have the chops to do it in a way that wouldn't come off as cheesy, right? It's like, I have an idea about writing a story with a dog that talks, and I have not figured out how to do that in a way that's not cheesy yet. So I don't know how many years it'll be before I can do that one. But I took a deep dive in Afrofuturism because of the cultural values, I think, that were inherent in that. So I read N.K. Jemisin. I don't know if you've read the City We Became, her City series. I read her. I read, tons of Octavia Butler. Parable of the Sower is very influential on this book. Lauren is named after Lauren in Parable of the Sower. I read River Solomon, who has a story about a giant ship, which kind of echoes the format of a plantation. Like, the people on the bottom, it's like, the people on the top are the richie versus, 1%ers, and then it goes down. It's a brilliant book. And let's see, who else did I read? Oh, Tananarive Due. She's got a book of short stories. I think it's called The Wishing Well. I might be wrong. But which has some futuristic stories in it, some dystopia stuff. Let's see, who else? Who else did I read? Nettie Okorafor, Colson Whitehead. Anyway, so I read a whole lot, and I actually took a class with Dr. Constance Bailey on Afrofuturism, and having those conversations was really important, talking about, like, what's important in the work, what are they trying to say, how do I respond physically, I guess, to this book? How do I respond emotionally? And I would say over and over, I mean, I didn't feel despair reading the books. So trying to use that as a model, a mentor text, all of them as mentor text for how to write this book. Because the last thing I want to do is leave a 15-year-old, in despair. I don't want that. I want them to feel like the world could be a better place, and there's a place for them, and that the world is better off with them because they have these feelings.
And last question, what is your favorite craft book?
Oh, well, I don't know if it's my favorite. I always used to use Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. I would walk after lunch and I would listen to the audiobook of that one and Bird by Bird, just because those were the classics like 25 years ago and I was writing 25 years ago. And so those were kind of my go-tos. But this one is one that I got for Dr. Hurt's class, and it just has some really fun prompts. And I'm wondering if my creature one came from here, about like you come home and find a creature on your porch that talks. But right now that one is, so it's got some great chapters. It's a fun book. I think books that I guess I would say maybe it does privilege genre. It says the illustrated guide to creating imaginative fiction. So it's got great art in it. It's got great illustrations, which I think are brilliant, about like story and choices. There's a prompt in there about like a door, which I'm going to give my students next week because I'm like, oh, this is fun. I like this. So that's right now, that's my favorite. It's by Jeff Vandermeer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. This was amazing. And are you going to have a local launch party?
Yeah, I'm doing something at Pearls. I think it's on October 11th. So I have 3 events that week, and I think my Pearls one is on Thursday, October 11th. So that'll be fun. I love Pearls, and I love to support local bookstores. Yep, Pearls, 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock it says. I don't know if it actually starts at 5 or 6, but I have to be there at 5. So Pearls in downtown Fayetteville, October 11th. So, which is 3 days after the book comes out. It's supposed to come out on October 8th.
Okay. I will try to come.
I would love to see you there. Hopefully there'll be cookies or cake.
Thank you so much for doing this. It was great to see you and to hear more about this book.
It was great to see you, and I'm so excited about what's going on with you. I want to talk more about that when you have time. So, all right. What do?
Bye. Take care.
You too.